You have to start by looking at what your business model is and you want it to be and sticking with it. I said a lot of the wrong things. I put my foot in my mouth quite frequently, but there was no rules.
What's a mistake worth avoiding at all costs that property managers make a lot?
People get too concerned with growing for the sake of growing. Be more methodical about what you want. Build your relationships along the way.
How else do you think property managers can differentiate themselves on the sales and marketing when it comes to attracting homeowners?
Being authentic to yourself and how you are with people will naturally come out in your brand. I didn't go out there to intentionally build a brand of Annie. Annie became my brand. Nobody can promise anybody. What you can control is the service you deliver.
You talked about all the innovation that took place during COVID. What's left to be innovated, right?
It's just bigger than I could have ever imagined.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, hospitality and real estate. And today I'm here with Annie Holcombe, a vacation rental thought leader, the director of technical supply at NextPax. She's also an industry celebrity and co-host at Alex and Annie. And very, very excited to have you, Annie, on the show today. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you. And I don't think that I am a celebrity. I appreciate the flowers, but that's not a celebrity, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Well-known individual, well-respected individual within the industry. We'll leave it at that, not
Thank
to say
you.
celebrity. But Annie, let's start with this concept of the hospitality gene that we were talking about. So you mentioned this as far as like there's individuals that have it, there's individuals that don't. What is the hospitality gene, and what do you think you need to have as an individual to be meant for it?
So I think the hospitality gene is just something that people have within them that they want to be hospitable to others. I read a book years ago, Deepak Chopra, and he talked about people being hospitable creatures and that we were all born with this bucket. And our job was to go fill other people's buckets up with kindness and warmth and generosity and hospitality and all those things. And the more hospitality and hospitable you were to others, eventually their buckets would fill up and overflow back to you. So it's kind of been like a driving force for me for probably about, I don't know, maybe 15 years, where I've just thought of it in those terms. And I finally started to realize that that's what our business is. Like, we know that we're a hospitality business, but the people that are in it the longest, and I think the ones that are making the most impact in it, they have that hospitality gene within them. They want to see all the good out there and do good and be part of this big process, as I said to you earlier, facilitating people's memories. Like, that's what we do at the core of it. It's travel. It's people going to various locations to experience new things. And sometimes it's someone's very first trip, and sometimes it's grandma's last trip. But whatever that is in between, there's all these memories that come along with that. And so I think that people who are in this business, who stay in this business, or who are passionate about it, they just have that gene in them that drives them to make it better for everybody.
And when did you realize that you had this gene?
Probably when I tried to leave the business and try something completely different. And I just kept 6 months into it. I was like, this is just not what I want to do. I just kept getting pulled back into it, even though there was times where I was working, when I worked in the hospital, in the property management side of things, cleaning rooms on a Friday afternoon for check-ins, or dealing with large groups that were checking in when I worked on the hotel side of the business. Like, these awful things that you just had to deal with, and working 20-hour days and having no days off through the summer. And I hated it at those moments, but then I left it and I craved it and I realized, like, when I started craving it, I was either crazy or I had something in me that wanted me to be back there. And as opposed to thinking I'm crazy, I just decided that I have a hospitality gene that I needed to feed.
Love it. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your background, just for people that don't know you or want to get to know you a little bit better? You've worked with major brands in our space, from Expedia, Marriott Homes and Villas, and others. But where did you get started in this hospitality industry, and what has been sort of your journey throughout, if you could summarize it?
So I think it's you talk to most people that are in property management specifically, and nobody like seeks it out. It's just something that sort of happens over time. And I was the same way. I was going to school. I had been a gymnast and had some injuries, and I had to have a knee reconstruction, which is like put me down for quite some time. And I needed to get a job when I got out to like pay my parents back for like putting me up for a couple of years. And so I started working at a hotel front desk, and it was during spring break or 4th of July, I can't remember, but it was during busy season and it was crazy. And it was just like, it was nonstop and going all the time. And I was like, this is just a wild business. But the owner of the business said, you need to be in sales. You don't need to be at the front desk. Like, you need to come work in my sales department. And so I moved over to sales and then did that for a little while and got recruited by a company in the same market who was going to be building condominiums. And at the time, they hadn't announced it, but they brought me over and I was part of their sales team. And they had the largest resort in the market, and they tore a couple buildings down. They built a condo, and they brought in a manager from Myrtle Beach, which was a competitive market of the market I was in, which is Panama City Beach. And he said, we're going to do what we did in Myrtle Beach. We're going to manage all the inventory in the market. We're going to be the biggest management company. I don't know how to get there, but I want you to be the person to help us do that. And so he kind of sent me out in the market like wild child with no playbook, no rules, just really having to figure it out of like, how do I get people to let us manage their units? How do I get them to manage buildings? How do I talk to a developer about, oh, you're building a condominium or you're building a vacation rental property? How do I convince you to give it to me to manage? And so I did that for a couple of years, and it was the most fun I ever had. It was really hard. I say this all the time. I said a lot of the wrong things. I put my foot in my mouth quite frequently, but there was no rules. So I didn't know if I was breaking any or what. But I learned a lot along the way. And then I stayed in property management and did that for several years and started a management company with my husband and two other gentlemen, and did that right about the time the market crashed in 2008. Then we had an oil spill, and all through that, I had started working with Expedia as using them as one of my channels, and complained that they didn't know how to work with vacation rentals. And the market manager said, I'm leaving, but they've decided to put somebody in the market and you complain more than anybody. So you should probably go for this job. I did. And I got the job, and I was a market manager for 2 years. Got very much luckily found an opportunity in Expedia to move to a key account role, which was on their global sales team, handling what at the time was the non-traditional lodging. So essentially anything that wasn't a hotel that was in the US. So it was all vacation rentals and timeshares and the campgrounds and just anything that wasn't a hotel that was a large account. I worked with those. So I did those for 2.5 years. And one of the accounts that I managed was a vacation rental channel manager, and got to know them really well. And when I left Expedia, that company actually went out of business, but somebody else bought their platform, and I knew it because I'd worked with them. So they hired me on to be part of the launch team with that channel manager. And that's how I got into channel management. So I did that, and they sold a couple of years ago, went to Homes and Villas, worked for Marriott Homes and Villas for a little over a year and a half, had an absolute blast, but had an opportunity to get back into channel management, kind of the distribution world. And so I joined NextPax in the spring of this year. So kind of a full circle moment for me, but been in all sides of the business. And it just makes me, I think, more understanding of property managers. It makes me more understanding of people on the channel management side, on the channel side. And I can speak all the languages, which is really great.
Just before we go into understanding like stage by stage key lessons and takeaways from each of those stages of your career, when does the podcast come about? I'm curious to know, how does that come about, and if you could tell us a little bit about that process too of building that podcast, and what you think you've learned throughout so many conversations with industry individuals.
So the podcast came about sort of as a joke. I tell the story that you always make good decisions after you have two glasses of wine. And Alex and I had met each other in 2017, I believe it was. And we met each other at a conference, and just neither one of us really knew anybody. She knew nobody, and I knew just a few people at this conference, but we sat with each other and we just became friends. And over years, we just stayed in touch and communicated, and we collaborated on a few things here and there. And then when COVID hit, there was an app called Clubhouse that got really popular. And I had a gentleman who asked me to join from Europe and said, we need some people in the US. And I thought, well, this is perfect because I love to talk. That's not a problem. And I don't have to be on video. So I didn't
Mhm.
have the self consciousness of it. So I joined this STR Thought Leaders group, and we had to host clubhouses every month and had chats about things going on in the industry. And I think it was one of those moments in time where everybody was trying to figure out how we're going to survive COVID. So people were more willing to interact with perfect strangers, jump on these clubhouses to just talk to people. Like everybody craved interaction. So I did that, and I had asked Alex to join me on a couple of them, and we had really good banter together, and we just never had thought about it. And so it just became an ongoing conversation. And then finally into that fall, when conferences started to happen back up after COVID, we went to the VRMA in San Antonio, and we had been texting each other about it, just kind of half joking, half true, like it'd be great, but we knew we didn't know anything about what we were doing. And we went to the conference and met Annette and Sarah, who have thanks for visiting. And we met them there, and they were like, absolutely, you should 100% do it. And then Will Slickers was there. Same thing. He was like, absolutely 100% do it. There's no girls, there's no women on the professional BR side, other than like Sarah and T, but there wasn't like two women doing it. But so we got really encouraged by that, and we just thought, well, let's just put it out there. And so we literally walked out of a session, had our Bitmoji that we had found and put together, put it out there, and just said, we're big things are coming, and just announced we were doing this podcast. We came up with a name while we were at the show, and everybody came to us like that afternoon and said, great, when's your first episode airing? We're like, well, we don't have any equipment. Like we don't have a clue like what we're doing. So by the following Monday, Alex had registered us for everything that we needed. She figured out what we needed for like recording equipment, everything. I mean, she's a taskmaster. She gets things done. And so we recorded our first episode, and then our first guest we had to record 3 or 4 times. I can't remember. It was Amber Hurdle. And we always tell her that if it had not been for her patience and her willingness to just continue to try to record with us, we would have given up. But she was like, no, 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 you're gonna be great. So we finally got her recorded, and then it's here we are almost, and we're going into almost our third year. So it's
Wow,
been crazy. But it's been great.
that's
It's
awesome.
been great.
And from all those conversations you must have had during the podcast, what would you say stands out as far as something you've learned, something that has impacted you from having those conversations? Because I don't know about you, but to me it's been such a learning opportunity talking with so many people, so many angles of the industry. So I'm curious, like, how has it impacted you, and is there any key lesson or takeaway that you could say, hey, what, this has been insightful?
I think the two things that stand out, they're not like mind blowing, but they're the two things that I really hooked into, was that the people in this business are kinder and more willing to support and collaborate than any other business that I've ever been encountered with. Like it just, the
Hmm.
vacation rental out of all travel is just the most collaborative and giving community of people that I've ever been a part of. And there's
Hmm.
just a lot of really, really, really smart people. And we joke about it a lot on the podcast, but a lot of the innovation and a lot of the big leaders that have emerged, different businesses and different leaders have come out of the area that I live. So we always joke that there's like something in the water in the panhandle of Florida. But we have a lot of really, really smart people that are just constantly thinking of new ways to do things. And it fascinates me because the innovation that happened during COVID was so rapid and so much and so substantive for our business that I don't think the hotel world has seen that much innovation in that short amount of time. I mean, we have leapt past the hotels in terms of a lot of our technology, like how we handle rates, how we handle just distribution, like the property management systems. Like there's so much creativity that's gone on, and I think that it's a business that fosters that and welcomes people who have ideas. They don't shun it and say, well, this is the way it's always been. And I think on the hotel side of things, there's a lot of rigidity because a lot of hotels are run by big brands and they've had these brands for 30, 40, 50, case of Marriott, almost 100 years. And they just don't want to change. They can't change things quickly. Whereas we can adapt quicker. And we've done that as an industry. So vacation rentals, short-term rentals as a whole is just it's just a fun place to be.
Absolutely. And talking about branding, you've of course built a brand for yourself, a personal brand throughout all of these years. You've built the brand on the podcast side of things. You've seen so many brands of operators get developed and whatnot. What have you learned about how to build a solid brand, and what do you think people can take away from that as far as building a brand in a way that is actually going to differentiate them from all the noise and all the competition that's out there?
So I think what's really important that people get lost in is just being authentic, because if you think about it, each one of us is completely different. We're all different. So you are automatically set apart by just your natural makeup. So if you just be your authentic self, I'm going to be different than you. You're going to be different than me. So just always have the authenticity of like what you are as a person at the root of every thought that you have. Now, granted, when you're building a larger business, you can't necessarily always think in your world, like what do you like? You have to think in bigger terms. But I think that as long as you're not trying to be something other than who you are, if luxury doesn't feel good to you as far as management, like if it just doesn't resonate, and maybe maybe those guests are too hard to deal with, like then authentically that's not where you need to be. You probably need to be with just like the general population of what the rentals are that are out there, the average rental, not these multi-million-dollar homes that people have higher expectations. And again, there's like, that's not to say that that's not, there's a place for everybody, but just try to be what you want to be. And the being authentic to yourself and how you are with people will naturally come out in your brand. But I don't have any like great words of wisdom, because I didn't go out there to intentionally build a brand of Annie, but Annie became my brand because I became known for like who I authentically am. Like, can I be awkward? Absolutely. Do I say the wrong things sometimes? Of course. But you're going to get the same person whether you're talking to me at a conference or you're talking to me on this podcast. So my brand is just being authentically Annie.
Being authentic, I love it. And in terms of like, you started by when you were talking about the timeline of everything you've gone through. At some point you were on the property management side and you were saying, hey, I was in sales. I was going out there and I was telling developers why they should choose us as opposed to other management companies. So what can you tell property managers about that process of differentiating themselves? Being authentic is of course fundamental, and you just mentioned that it was the core of building a brand. How else do you think property managers can differentiate themselves on the sales and marketing side of things when it comes to going out there and attracting homeowners to them as opposed to the 10 other management companies that are there in their market?
I think you have to start by looking at what your business model is and you want it to be and sticking with it. I mean, there's always going to be areas where you have to bend in terms of like maybe the cost or a service that you give one, maybe not the other, but having a baseline of what you want the business to be and then delivering on it. Because I think some people make these great grandiose promises of, I see it all the time in the market that I live in, is managers will open up and they're like, well, we can promise you more revenue than manager B down the road. Nobody can promise anybody unless they've got this endless bank account and they can guarantee they can write the same check every month. I mean, there's just things that are that are not within the control, but what you can control is the service you deliver. And I think that if you set those guidelines of what the service is going to be and deliver on it, and you're honest and that sometimes you're going to fail and accept that. But again, with owners, there are going to be some that are all about money, and there's nothing you can do about that. And they're never going to be happy because either they paid too much for the property, or it just, at the end of the day, it's just all about the bottom line for them. But for the vast majority, in my experience, it's the relationship. Can they trust you to take care of that asset that they have? Because most of the people in the beach markets, for sure, but I would say even in urban markets, and there's a lot of people that have these as like second homes, or it's something for like they want their family to be able to utilize down the road. So this is
Mhm.
part of their family, and you need to take care of it. And so I think that if managers are, again, just honest with themselves as to what they can deliver, that's going to come out in the relationship that they build with the owners. And then the owners will be their biggest fans, and um, refer other business to them. And you don't really have to go crazy on your marketing if you have, if like, again, if go back to being authentic. If people know that what they're going to get from you is what you told them, and you're delivering on that. Now, there's variables to that, of course, but I think, again, it just goes back to honesty, and that honesty and transparency, and then obviously the authenticity are just my biggest hot buttons, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, not because once you build that reputation of hey, when you say you're gonna do something, it happens and whatnot. I mean, that's goodwill that compounds. If
Yeah.
if 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 you have referrals because you're delivering a good service, that's also something that compounds, right? Like
Yeah.
I was reading a book on how to grow businesses. I like to read business books, and the impact of churn, like homeowners leaving, it's gonna happen naturally, right?
Yeah.
But then if you don't counter that natural churn with referrals, right? With owners being so delighted by the quality of the service you provide
Hmm.
that they decide to refer you, then really, if you don't advertise, you're shrinking, right? The business is
Yep.
shrinking because the churn is costing you more than the growth you're bringing in. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that retention for property management companies? Of course, relationship building is the center of that, and you've talked about authenticity and honesty, and I'm guessing, just from your experience going through your career, relationships seems to be a recurring theme. Like, you met this person here that
Hmm.
all of a sudden was hiring, and or whatever, right? So what has your approach been to building those deep relationships that can help develop a career or even retain clients? Like, what's your thinking when it comes to relationship building?
I think it's really important to know that, especially if you're on the sales side of things, sometimes you can get lost in the numbers and think like it's about hitting those goals all the time. And yes, I mean, you want to hit your goals, and that's what a salesperson does, but at the end of it, sometimes you're not the right fit for that person or that customer at that
Hmm.
moment. But that doesn't mean that if you are supportive of what they need and maybe give them advice, offer them guidance, just to be there, to be a sounding board for them, they'll come and buy from you later on. And so it's always proven out to me that I could try to sell somebody 3 times over, and they never buy from me or at that job. But 4, 5, 6 years down the road, they remembered that I was helpful, or I made them. I always leave people with the, I'm still available to you even if you don't use my service. You can still call me and ask a question if you need advice. I still have people that will call me and ask me about channels, or they don't use NextPax right now. They might be using somebody else, or they might be just using their PMS, but people will call me and ask me questions or reach out to me and get advice. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I'm always available to them. And I would say that as I've made myself more available to offer or just be there, that has reaped more reward for me than just like making the calls, because I've built the relationships up. And I did never say it right, but there's that people don't remember what you've done for them. They remember how you made them feel. And so I
Mm.
made them feel valued. I made them feel heard. I made them feel listened to somewhere along the way, made them feel supported, that they remembered me enough to think, oh, okay, she might not have been able to help me at that role, but this is the role she's at now where she can possibly support me and help me in her role. So
Mhm.
it's really about just over time, like you said, that goodwill layers over time, that people remember it and they'll reach back out to you. So I would just tell anybody to not get completely lost in goals and numbers. While it's important, it's more important to establish yourself as someone who can be sought out for advice, sought out for guidance, sought out for knowledge. I don't know everything, but I know a little bit about a lot of things. And so if I don't know the answer, I will either find it out or help them find the person to get that answer. And that has
Mhm.
just made my network like just grow. It's just bigger than I could have ever imagined.
Mhm. That's very interesting. Yeah, because of course you're trying, let's say you're a property management company listening to this, you're trying to grow. Like there's owners that might not be willing to pass on the management to you today or tomorrow, but hey, if you, as you said, made them feel a certain way and it was genuine and it was authentic, who knows, maybe at some point they will end up using your management services, or maybe they'll never end up using your management services, and that's
Or
all right
they'll
as
yeah.
well.
Or
You
but the
know,
next
that
time they're at their property and somebody says, "Hey, I don't like my management company." And they were like, "Oh, well, I know somebody that would be good." I mean, they're gonna think of you. And so it's just about that. The old way back in the day in marketing, it was the top of mind awareness, the TOMA that everybody focused on. It was like if you just make sure that you're top of mind for that subject or that area that people need to know, like they need somebody, they'll reference you and remember that. And it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but it'll be down the road. And so it's the same thing for owners. I mean, you want to network with them, and sometimes some of those owners that you can't get on your plan are the ones you regret it when you finally do, because they are difficult and they were giving you those signs all along. But I think people get too concerned with growing for the sake of growing and maybe not growing that'll benefit everybody in the process. I mean, the bad owners can be bad to guests, can be bad to the staff. I mean, it can be bad for everybody involved. So be more methodical about what you want, but
Mhm.
build your relationships along the way.
And then if you have an owner that is somewhat difficult, it's also like, how do you go about saying, hey, what, this is something that I can fix, and trying to work through that, versus when do you draw the line of saying what, we're not a fit, and it's gonna be beneficial for both of us to part ways.
Yeah,
Like,
the
how
break
have you
the
approached that?
breakup.
Yeah. How
um
have you approached that in relationships, or seen property managers successfully approach that when it comes to their homeowners?
Yeah, so I'm a really bad person to ask in terms of that, because I am a conflict avoider, to be quite honest. I like
Okay.
try to find ways to make it not bad. But
Okay.
what I would say is I have had to break up with owners over time. And it's just a matter of it's just not working out for either one of us. But my line in the sand has always been like, if they're going to be treat staff bad. So if they yell at the staff, they undermine the staff, try to hire the staff outside of they're working for the management company, like just people that do underhanded things, they generally do it a lot, and if that you catch them once, they're going to do it again. So I think you just have to
Mhm.
be firm about your ground rules, and know that sometimes you'll always replace that bad owner with a better one. There's always another one out there.
Yeah, having that mindset of abundance, I think,
Yes,
can
exactly.
solve a lot
Yes.
of problems. Because
Scarcity.
sometimes you feel, yeah, sometimes you feel like, oh, if I lose this owner, it represents this percentage of my bookings or whatever it might be. But no, there's others out there. That makes sense. Now, Annie, when you talk with so many people in so many areas of this industry, what are you what are you seeing as the one thing, or the one area where there's the most, let's call it, disruption opportunity? You talked about all the innovation, that took place during COVID, and how accelerated that innovation was compared to, let's
Oh,
say, hotels. Like, what's left to be innovated, right, in the vacation rental space? Like, is there an area or a function, a department where you say, like, there's still a solution that's missing for this thing here on the technology side of things, let's say?
so I was at the Skift conference, the Skift short-term rental summit forum, I think it was called, in New York back in May, June timeframe. And there was a session with an association from New York called Roar and Philip Kennard from Future Stay. And they talked about the representation within the industry from the smaller operator side of things. And I think like this isn't really a technology solution, but there's a lot of talk about, well, there's two things here. There's a lot of talk about regulations and
Mhm.
why all these regulations are happening. And some people will say it's all these people that are doing Airbnb only and they don't know what they're doing. And then there's other people will say, well, it's just people who are absentee owners or people just aren't understanding what the industry is like. And so there's like two sides of this conversation. And I think the biggest thing that could move the industry forward, in my mind, outside of technology, is bringing the two sides together. So the STR smaller, that under 20, I think Philip said that 95% of the industry in the US, 95% of the industry is represented by 20 people with less than 20 units. And I think it was even smaller than
Mhm.
that. But if you think of it in terms of like the vast majority is these smaller operators, we don't have them participating in VRMA. We don't have them participating in anything. They're out there hungry for information and they're probably not doing things purposely bad. They just don't know. So we need to bring the two
Mhm.
sides together and have more access to information. And there's a lot of conversation. If you go on LinkedIn at any given day, there's conversation about sessions at shows and how do we get them access to education and how do we understand that the way people operated 30 years ago is not the way people are operating now, and that people are using
Mhm.
TikTok and all of these things. So I think that it's just really just without technology involved, it's just bringing two sides of the coin together to work together. And then in terms of technology, like on a global perspective, one of the things that we saw at NextPax, and we've talked to channels about it, is there is a large swath of countries that technology is not prevalent. South America, Latin America, Mexico, Asia. There's some countries in Europe. There's just not a lot of access to technology, and it's either it's cost prohibitive, people don't know where to get it, or they're just overwhelmed. I mean, they you look at a PMS and there's so many pieces and parts to it, and all you want to do is put your unit on Airbnb and maybe another channel. Like
Mhm.
you don't want to you don't want all of this stuff. You just want a few things. You don't want to be big. You're not looking to be Vacasa. You just want to be John who has 5 units in Mexico City as an example. So I think that that's where technology and cheap technology for some of these providers can, or these managers, comes into play. And I'm really excited about what we're doing at NextPax is we've got a cloud-based system. It's called NXT beds. And it's just a very, very light PMS, like the lightest PMS you would possibly need. It just does basic things, but it's connected to our network of channels. So if you're a property manager that's sitting in, again, Mexico City, because that's where you and I just were together, who has 10 units and the only thing you have it on right now is Airbnb, well, like what other business could you be getting to fill in some of the holes in the calendar? The people that I talk to down there, they're not running 100% occupancy. They have room to grow. And there are providers down there that have literally hundreds of units and they're still doing it on a notebook because they don't have technology, because it's just cost prohibitive to do business in some of these countries, whether it be through the payment processors or double what they are in the US, or just having somebody available to process reservations. Like it's expensive. And so being able to have some of these basic tools to start your business out and to like dip your toe in the water, I think it's important. And I think that these newer managers need to be set up for success from the start, because that is going to help us all as we grow as an industry. It'll help with where we fall into regulations, because more people will be professionalized and have access to the tools, knowing to pay their taxes, knowing to have their registration numbers, like knowing all of these things that they likely don't know until either the channel shuts them down because they didn't have it, or they go to their unit and there's a sign on the door that says your unit is closed because you didn't register. Like, there's just that
Mhm.
happens in some places, and I think that technology for them is the answer. So
I love it.
two answers to
Yeah.
to one question.
No, I love it. I love it. Yeah, no, because I think that, to your point, bringing together those hosts with larger, more professional operators. I mean, giving them both access to information and resources just elevates the industry as a whole and stops the finger pointing that can be
Hmm.
happening on both sides. And then, as you
Exactly.
said, on the emerging countries side of things, I mean, we've seen it a lot too. We do a lot of business internationally, and it's very interesting to see how behind some of these countries are in terms of technology adoption, and you wonder why. And I think
Yeah.
the cost side of it is certainly something. I mean, even on the currency side, I mean, some of these
Yeah.
countries, they get money in their local currency, and the exchange rates, when now you're looking at paying the most sophisticated PMS from the US, it's completely, it cannot be
Yeah.
done, right? It just doesn't
Yeah.
work. So I love that you're building that aspect, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Now, what if we go back to sort of your experience in all angles of this industry, as well as talking with so many property managers, so many operators, so many professionals in this space, what would you say is a common mistake that you see? Let's talk about property managers, property management companies make. What's a common mistake that you, if you could prevent someone from making it earlier on, you would say, hey, watch out for this. I know you haven't gotten to it yet, but Annie has seen it. Either on your end,
Yeah.
or from others. Like, what's a mistake worth avoiding at all costs that property managers make a lot?
I think one that's overlooked, and I just have experience and I still see it, which I'm surprised, is managers that think that they're the only player in their market, so therefore they don't engage in their market. And so, like,
Mm.
knowing your market and being the expert in your market is so important, but also being friends. You can be, I think it was like Lino Maldonado said it as co-opetition. Like, be cooperative and collaborative, but they're still your competition. It's like keep your friends close, your enemies closer type thing.
Mhm.
But you have to know who they are, and you have to cheer them on. And it's not about undercutting them or trying to steal their business. I mean, sure, if you're doing everything right, you're going to get the business. I mean, that's you'll win in the end. But I think that a lot of people don't think about the fact that the more they are engaged in their local community and engage with their competitors, the better off they're going to be. Because again, there's going to be a situation where Joe's Rentals down the road gets an owner and it's not the right fit for their company, so they're going to want to refer it out to somebody else, and they're going to want to
Mhm.
know, if they refer it out to somebody else, is it going to come back to bite them, or is it going to be something that's going to be good? So the more you talk with um your cohort and your market, like the better off you're going to be. So I think that that's just one thing outside of like just business operations and technology, that there are still people that overlook the importance of being friends with your being frenemies.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, no, there's a lot of synergies that can be built, collaboration, opportunities that can come up, and learning at the very least. So I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about, okay, so that's a mistake, right? A mistake that people are still making. What about something that you do, or you have seen property managers do successfully, but that just not a lot of people follow, or you wish more people were following? Like, what's sort of one activity or one thing or one, whatever it might be, mindset that that you think if more property managers adopted, they'd be more successful?
I think it goes back to what we talked about a little while ago was the scarcity mindset. Like if you're constantly in the scarcity mindset, you're doing things very reactive and you're not thinking about the bigger picture and focusing on what you can manage. Just knowing that this is a giant business. There's abundance out there for everybody. There's plenty of business out there. Now, yes, there's going to be people that say, but there's only so many rentals in my market. Sure. Yeah, I absolutely, I get that. But if you operate in a space of like, I've got to have it all and nobody else can have it, and I don't want to root the business on, I want to just root my business on, like that mindset, I think it becomes, it's like a almost like a cancer within your business, and your team starts to adopt it, and then people start to do and act in ways that they shouldn't act. I would say as far as like managers that are doing really good things that I don't see, I'm seeing more of, but when they started doing it, there wasn't much of it, is Lauren Madewell. It's Annie Bellum's cabin rentals up in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. She just got out there and started, again, going back to authenticity. She was just like, we live in a kind of a quirky destination. There's a lot of weird little history things in the market, and she started not making fun of it but highlighting them as part of kind of what the market was and what her business was. And it just became very charming, and it became something that if you go to Gatlinburg and you want a fun place to stay, you're going to choose Antebellum's. There's several great managers in the market, so don't get me wrong, but I think that she just really leaned into the quirkiness and the folklore of her market, and it just became like the underlying part of what her brand is. So yes, Antebellum's is a cabin rental company. It's been around for many years. It's a family-owned business, but the charm that she was able to take from the quirkiness of the market has just catapulted her like to a whole nother level in terms of what people see, and I think what managers could be in other markets. Just own it and enjoy it and capitalize on it. Like she's done a great job with that.
Nice, nice. I like that. I like that. That's actually a pretty interesting concept. So what's unique about my market, and rather than hide it or anything else like this, let's embrace it and let's talk about it. I love it. And when it comes to that mindset, you talked about a book earlier. I think it was you mentioned Deepak Chopra.
Chopra,
I
yeah.
can I can pronounce it correctly, like a lot of words I cannot pronounce correctly. But so you seem to be into this personal development space from just the fact that you read the something from him, and also I see some books in your shelf behind. So
Oh
what
yeah.
would be what would be a book what would be a book that you would say has had the most impact or influence on your personal life,
Oh my
and what
gosh, I have to
and
look
why?
at.
Whatever comes to mind.
Um, it's really the Deepak Chopra one, because that one has just stuck with me, and I read it so long ago. And interestingly enough, a lot of the book was way over my head because he's talking metaphysical things that just like scientific stuff that is just way above my comprehension. But he broke down just like the human condition, that's probably not the right word, just like what we are as humans and like our purpose, and like there's this, that we're part of this larger universe, and how we interact with it, and how you what you give is what you get. And it took me a while to really truly understand that, and that, if you're going to continue to give out negativity and you're going to be always coming from a place, again, that scarcity mindset, but coming from a place of defense, then you're always going to
Hmm.
have to be on defense. And so I think that was probably the most life-changing book for me that I reference a lot.
Hmm.
And it helped me get through some challenging times in my own personal life, because I had to step back and say, do I want to be in this place of negativity, or do I want to try to find the sunny side of it? Yes, there's days when you can't find the sunny side for sure, but if you have more
Hmm.
days that are sunny than not, then the universe kind of rewards you in kind.
And how have you gone about trying to find the sun when it's just cloudy and messy and there's just problems left and right, and all you can see is problems? Like how have you managed to like stick your head above and see things from another perspective? Like, what has worked for you in terms of changing your mindset in
It
those moments?
honestly, like, I take a walk, like, I connect with nature, I do yoga,
Okay,
like, I think, you
good.
just you have to remove yourself from the situation to gain perspective and realize that if you look back at that, like the situation, if today is a bad day, look at it and say, like, is this the worst day I've ever had? Probably not. And I made it through my worst day. So if you can make it through the worst days, then bad days are easier to get through. It's just a matter of perspective. And so I try to do that. It's hard. I mean, I think that everybody's challenged with that, but I think that that's why I love this business so much, is that for the most part, the vast majority of people that I encounter are of the same mindset. Is it's just like, this too shall pass. We'll get through it. And if you make sure that you have kind of a tribe of people around you that you can go and just like word vomit on them everything that's in your head, and they're not going to judge you for it, and they're going to be supportive of you and say, like, we're here with you, we're going to hold your hand, we're going to get you through it, like, that's really important too. But you also have to be thinking that you're the master of your destiny, and you can control your mindset, and the more you can
Hmm.
look at the sunny side of it, and then try to realize that it's not the end of the world. And what we do in
Hmm.
this business is not, it's not saving the world, it's not curing cancer, it's not life changing, but it's important, and we do good things, and tomorrow will be better than today if it's a bad day.
Hmm. This too shall pass. I really like that.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think that that they talk a lot about it in Stoicism, and so
Mhm.
I would just add to that the concept of externals, like really differentiating what are things you can control and what are things that
Yep.
you cannot, and understanding that there's nothing that can be done on the externals, on things that you cannot control, and so focusing on the things that you can control, I think.
Yeah.
Comes from that stoic wisdom. Awesome,
Yeah.
Annie. Well, this has been super fun. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all those insights and sharing your story with us today. Any final thoughts of insight that you'd like to share with operators, with property managers, or if not, where can people stay in touch with you?
I don't have any thoughts of wisdom. I think, again, it just goes back to your mindset and how you handle things. And just, I love this business, and I appreciate you asking me to come talk with you. It's great, and I love your podcast. I love that you're doing this. It's so cool to see other people doing this, because sometimes it can feel very alone when you're just talking to people through a video. You don't feel like, but there's a whole other network of people out there doing what you're doing. But if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. They can reach out to me there, or they can reach me at annie.holcombe@nextpax.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Annie, for your time, and hopefully I'll see you soon at another event.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.